no bones about it. Very cut dry. Do this or do that, and that's it. There's no messing around with Matthew's gospel in this chapter. And in fact, it's a really, it's a challenging piece of scripture, but it's also a piece of scripture that we as church will often say that this is what distinguishes us from other organizations or even from other religions. Sorry. Losing my, there we go. What distinguishes us from other groups and organizations and religions is that this piece from Matthew, that this kind of universalist attitude towards the people of God, that in Matthew, it doesn't matter who we're serving, the assumption is that everyone we serve is a child of God. And that's what kind of sets it apart. We don't look after our own first, we look after everybody because we do not know when we will see the face of Christ in those whom we serve. Now, you have to read all of Matthew 24 and everything in Matthew 25 to kind of get to this. But these texts that we've used the last few weeks are the texts that our National Stewardship Organization have given us for these Stewardship Sundays. And I think it's really interesting that they've chosen this one as part of our Serving Our Neighbors program this year. But when you read chapters 24 and the piece before this in 25, you have some of Matthew's most challenging parables. There's the parable of the 10 bridesmaids. There's the parable of the servants and the talents, the ones who hide the talents and the ones who use them. There's all of these really challenging parables, and in each of them, there's this statement about the kingdom of God and what it will look like. This piece, this end of Matthew 25, feels in some way a bit more of a, so this is what the metaphors look like, now here's the stuff in action. And the stuff in action is, what do we do with ourselves? How do we engage in the world? How do we serve the world, both physically and through the money that we have and the resources that we are able to tap into as one of the richest countries and a wealthy communities in the world? I was once, I remember preaching on this one time, and I had a person in the congregation who was an anthropology professor at UBC. And I made this statement, and he said, that can't be true. He actually said it from the computer. And I'm like, it is. I read it. It wasn't even online. It was in like Newsweek or something like that. Who remembers the 1% movement from a few years ago? Or the other 98%? There was that whole thing, the Occupy Wall Street, all that. Remember all of that? Okay, and they were talking about the 1%. And there is within our own country, our own kind of Western civilization, a 1%. There is a 1% out there. But when you look on the world stage, when you look at the whole world, and this is what this article, I'm pretty sure it was Newsweek or The Economist, one of these really intellectual things. When you look at the world economy, if you own property or have resources that are equal to or greater than $250,000 US, guess what? You're part of the 1%. And that made people kind of stop and look at me. And this is when this anthropology prof starts arguing with me from the pew. And I'm like, but it's true. And he's like, no, it's not. He goes, can't pause that. And I said, yeah. I said, what, the research has been done. And if you own or possess or have access, own property or have monetary resources where you have you have access to more than $250,000 US, you're part of the 1%. And we often don't think about ourselves as part of the 1%, right? We tend to more think about the 1% being Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs when he was alive, the Walmart family, the Waltons. When we think about the 1%, we tend to think of those people being the 1%. Well, they're the 1% of the 1%. Right? Don't any of you mathematicians out there question my math. But you get what I'm trying to tell you, right? We have an abundance in our lives. We have a huge abundance in our lives. We follow a man who brought together a community from the ragtag folks of the world that he lived in and attempted to get them to understand that even they had an abundance to share with one another. An abundance of love and resources and a way of living in the world that was very contrary to the world that they lived in. And we too have access to that. We too have access to resources and ways of being that can change the way the world is, because there are very few of us who are truly happy with the way the world runs right now. It's hard to walk through our streets or to go down to the five corners and say that the world is fair and just. It is hard to walk around our world or our streets and say that this is the way God sees things and wants things to be. Not if we understand God to be a God of compassion and love and grace and mercy. If we want to throw words like that around, we also have to get behind the actions that translate those words into God's vision and dream for all of us, not just us as individuals. And we do, as individuals, work really hard. There's no question about that. We only have to look at what has been a 3-week appeal to know that you all, or as my Texan friend from school would say, y'all, are generous people. Beyond any doubt, you're generous people. Generous of heart and soul when we need stuff. And I've seen it personally in my ministry in other spaces. I was ordained in 2002. I was sent off to the North Thompson, a beautiful little pastoral charge of 2 congregations whose main focus in life and ministry in life is to knock the corners off of newly ordained ministers and actually make them into real pastors. That's their job, and they do it well. They have done it for a long time. 3 of us who have served there have obviously had the corners knocked off well, because we went on to serve the church in other places. I became president of conference. One of them became conference staff person, and another sits on our executive at General Council. They do a good job of molding us, making us real ministers, getting rid of all that book learning stuff. So I was ordained into there in 2002. In 2003, and almost a year to the day I was sent to that lovely community, I woke up to the smell of smoke. The interior of BC was having its first major, what they call interface forest fire in a long time. And it was terrifying. I still twitch when I smell smoke. But nonetheless, we evacuated. We were out of our homes for 10 days, and the story is long and powerful and makes me weep every time I think about it. But when we came home, when we got back to our places of living and business and life, there was lots to reconstruct. There was lots to do. And there's processes involved in all of that. The government step in with emergency social services, of course, because no one's living at home, everyone's out of pocket. So emergency social services step in, and they had put us all in hotels, and they made sure we had food. And on the day, as a minister, as the only full-time pastor in the community, I was one of the first people back. My family weren't even allowed in, but I was allowed back in before anybody else, because they said they wanted the pastors in the community waiting on folks coming home. So I was allowed back in, and some of the first people who were there were the Salvation Army with their food trucks. Thanks be to God for food trucks. They were there with their food trucks. So there's me and the Salvation Army and emergency services. That's it. That's the only people in town. And the folks came rolling home, and about 2 hours after they came rolling home, actually Home Depot came rolling in with all of their staff from some of their they brought like about 100 members of staff from the stores right across BC with all of the cleaning materials that we needed to clean our houses. Because any of you who have ever had a smoke damaged home knows how messy that is. It's disgusting. The Mennonite Disaster Services, actually a crew based out of Abbotsford, they turned up and they cleaned our homes. Kids on holiday, on school vacation, carried toxic fridges and toxic freezers out of everybody's homes and lined them up for the province to come and get rid of. Kids who should have been playing at lakes and having a fun time were cleaning for seniors, washing walls down and taking curtains down and drapes down and vacuuming furniture and washing and cleaning for days on end. Good church people. Good people who saw their ministry as a ministry of the heart, a ministry of giving. We're about a week or 2 weeks into kind of the chaos, and I get this phone call from a lady in my internship site. And she says, what do you need, Karen? And I said, I don't know. There's a list. And she says, what do you need? I said, I don't know. I haven't slept more than 3 or 4 hours for the last 2 weeks. I have no idea what I need. She says, well, what damage is done to the church? And I said, well, we got flooded. So one of the problems had been flooding in some of the older property, because I don't know if you know, but one of the things they do when they fight forest fires is they put the sprinkler system on the roof of the buildings, and they douse the building, they drench it for days. They just keep these sprinklers going, and they drench the buildings. They pull water from the local rivers. Thankfully, Barrier has 5 rivers around it, so we have lots of water. And so the carpets in the building had got soaked because it had run down the walls, because this is an old building, it's full of holes, and so the carpets had gotten soaked. So we weren't able to worship in the sanctuary, we were worshiping in the hall, and so I said, well, that's the major damage, is we need new carpeting. And she says, okay, go buy carpet. Go order a carpet. So I went and I ordered a carpet, and a check for $5,000 was in my hand the next day by express post to pay for carpets for the building. Then I get a phone call from a member of the congregation that had sent me out for ordination. My friend Jim, you know Jim Chisholm. Jim Chisholm called me. Some folks in the congregation will know Jim. Jim phoned me and he said, what can I do, Karen? And I said, I don't know, Jim. I haven't slept more than 3 hours for 2 weeks. I don't know. He's like, tell you what, he said, I'm on my way. He said, I'm coming. He said, and I will help you. You just tell me what you need. And so Jim left his wife and his family down in the Lower Mainland. They drove up into the interior, and he lived in my office for a week. No, in fact, no, it was more like 2 weeks. He lived in my office. And Jim cleaned and he cooked for volunteers, and he was everywhere helping us organize stuff and kind of getting things organized and sorted. And then Doug Goodwin, who's our executive secretary, phoned me up and said, Karen, there's money coming in. What do you want to do with the money? I said, I don't know. Doug, I've only slept 3 hours. I said, I don't know, I can't make my mind up. It's hard to decide. He said, well, it's for whatever you need. Everybody who's donated from the United Church from the conference has said that you can do whatever you want with it. There's no strings attached. You do what you think is right for your community. And we ended up with something like $18,000 paid directly to the church. Not to a fund that had to go through a bureaucratic process to be distributed, but directly to our church for us to figure out what to do. And the conference and the National Church were really generous, because when it came, this was a mission supporting church, so when you give to mission and service, you're supporting these small communities. It's just where I'm going with this story. The National Church did not take that $16,000 into account when they approved us for our mission support grant that year, which was very generous because they could have. And mission support grant was the thing that kept this little church going. And the mission support grant, where does that come from? That comes from you. The mission support grant comes out of your M&S offerings. The M&S offerings don't only go to support disaster relief, they go to make sure that small communities with hardly any people sitting in the pews, but realizing that some congregations, like our little congregation up in Barrie, is actually a central focal point for community life, have to survive. And one of the ways they make that happen is that National Office give us money to pay salary for staff. And none of that would have been possible. None of it would have been possible without the generosity of people in pews. People who know that the church is important. Who know that the church is about serving our neighbours even if we don't know who they are. That the church is about serving the neighbours because, as Carl said a couple of weeks ago, it is the most selfish thing we can do because it makes the world better for us. Serving our neighbour, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, giving water to those who thirst, visiting the prisoner, and caring for the sick is the most selfish thing in the world. Because it makes the world a better place. And if you don't want the world to be a better place, please put your hand up. I don't think any of you would not want the world to be a better place. We all want the world to be a better place. We don't give because God has a test for us. We give in response to the bountiful love that God expresses for us. We give because we know that we are already a forgiven people. That the grace of God's love, which is unmeasurable, has already fallen upon us. It fell upon us, as the psalmist says, before we had begun to be knit in our mother's wombs. The grace of God has fallen upon all of us long before we were even, as my dad would say, a twinkle in my father's eye. The grace of God has fallen upon us in abundant love, which is immeasurable. And how we respond to the world is crucial in response to that love. Love, as I have often been reminded by folks in our Sunday school programs, is an action. It's not an emotion, it's an action. It's a verb. I always love when the kids are learning about verbs and stuff like that at school and somebody mentions love in church. You know that's a verb, Reverend Karen. It's not an emotion. I'm like, yes, I know. Because you've all told me that year after year. But it's important for us to know that love is a verb. And that love has a place, needs a place, a vessel, a bowl to hold it, so that we can express it and share it and nurture it and grow it and go out into the world for it. That's why being communities of faith is so important. That's why this community is important. Because if we are not able to financially support the community, we can't do stuff like this. We can't do dinner done at Ruth and Naomi's. We can't do mitten trees at Christmas, or volunteer at the kettle for the Salvation Army in the summer, or in the winter, in the Christmas period. We can't put together gift baskets and meals and all of the wonderful things that are done here. We cannot do that if there is not a vessel of love to hold it all together. There has to be that vessel. We are that vessel. But it does mean we have to sacrifice something. We do have to sacrifice. We have to sacrifice our time, our money, our energy, and just when we think we've given enough, as Wesley would say, we are called to give more. And that is a hard message for us to hear. Because all around us, we are told that there is not enough. But there is enough. There's enough love in each and every one of you. There's enough hope in each and every one of you. There's enough God in each and every one of you. There's just a little bit in each of us. And that is enough.